Rancho del Lago 2021, and I'm CheryLynn. Hi, and welcome back. Thank you so much for visiting with me again today. If I remember correctly, it was 2 videos ago that I covered the topic of do-it-yourself fertilizer. This particular one was a high nitrogen using yeast and water and sugar. Nitrogen in your garden soil is critical. But amazingly, just in the air that we breathe, there is probably 78% nitrogen content floating around us all the time. The problem is your plants cannot utilize that until it is converted to something that their roots can absorb. Hang in here with me to the end of the video. I will provide you with a list of some very surprising names of plants that are nitrogen fixers. I am not a master gardener. I am a fairly new homesteader, and I've never been super good at growing things. Neither one of these thumbs is green. So I'm learning, and as I learn, I'm happy to share with you. What we're talking about is actually permaculture, and what it boils down to is the relationships between plants and soil and air and how they benefit each other. And if you want good produce from your garden or a beautiful garden full of ornamentals, understanding these relationships is critical. I knew the bare basics, but definitely not enough. It's not just about the consistency of your soil. Like mine here is very much like clay, only not quite as dense. Where I used to live in Florida, it was very much sandy. But it's really more about the nutrients in your soil. So today we're going to talk again about nitrogen, but in a different way. Nitrogen absorbed into the plant roots is what makes those beautiful green leaves, all the foliage, makes your fruit trees grow long before they're ready to put on little buds and grow you fruits. It's the lush nutrient. Something I learned only recently is that certain plants and trees have like magical powers. They're called nitrogen fixers. And what they actually do is take some of that nitrogen out of the air, process it down through their stems into their roots, where they have these little nodules that are filled with a bacteria that eats those nitrogen particles and then excretes nitrates and nitrites that other bacteria can eat and feed the roots of your plants. It also benefits plants around it because it's improving the soil. Fixers increase the nitrogen in soil for other plants to use to create protein for growth and chlorophyll so that they can synthesize. Knowing what plants do this fixing gives you the advantage of being able to interplant these fixers with your other plants so that you use far less fertilizer that's man-made and you take advantage of the fertilizer that's nature-made. So in the fields around me is basically corn. This corn is grown for feeding livestock. We're now at the 3rd week of August, and where I live, the corn that was planted in June when the rains began is now about 5 foot high. When it's time for this corn to be harvested, then the farmers plant with another crop. This crop restores nutrients back into the soil. It's not intended to be harvested, only to be tilled back in. Generally, these crops are beans and peas and cilantro, sometimes clover. All of these plants and many, many more are those nitrogen fixers. So why not just use fertilizer? Well, here's the big picture that you have to look at. When the nitrogen is pulled in from the air by these nitrogen fixers, it goes through a natural conversion, taking many steps to become the proteins that the plant needs for its growth. So not only is the conversion the natural way to do it, but it's in the right amounts. When we put fertilizer on our plants, we're putting a lot on in one big dose, rather than the natural way where it's collected a little at a time and fed in a little at a time to go through the process. So what happens to all the extra that we give the plants when we're dosing them? It can go down in through the soil to the underlying water, and in large doses can contaminate that. It can run off into streams and rivers, and again, in large doses, contaminate that. And that's one of the reasons why you've seen over the past several decades so many complaints about dairy farming, large ranching, because the cattle have so much nitrogen in their poo that when it rains and it washes into the soil or into nearby rivers and streams, it causes a great deal of pollution. That pollution grows algae. That algae blocks up and stops up all of the water flows and contaminates it for use of other animals and humans. I'm not saying that nitrogen fixers are the only way, because there are other natural ingredients such as the yeast and the sugar and the water to create a high nitrogen fertilizer. Over-fertilizing with our synthetic man-made fertilizers can actually kill the soil. During the last century, the nutritional value of vegetables commercially grown has significantly decreased. The whole secret to growing good crops is soil, 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 and your end result will be one that you're happy with. Improve the soil, and all other plant needs are secondary. Now, another very important note about the nitrogen fixers, and I encourage you to Google it. Look up what plants and what trees are nitrogen fixers, and you might even be surprised to find that you have some in your own yard. Nitrogen fixer plants and trees should never be given nitrogen fertilizers, even the natural kind. And when I did some Googling, I took a walk around my yard, and I was surprised to find that I already have several nitrogen fixing plants in my yard and garden. 2 of my very biggest shade trees are nitrogen fixers. Let's go out to the yard and take a look, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, here we are out by the goat yard. And this huge tree right here that definitely needs trimmed and provides so much shade for the goats is called a mesquite tree. It forms pods that the goats love to eat, and actually Mexicans love to eat as well. But the thing about the mesquite, which I did not know until just a short time ago, is that it is a nitrogen fixer. And this huge tree, which is also a beautiful shade tree, and that's why we moved the bunny rabbit area underneath it, is called by its Mexican name guamuchil. I'm not sure how that translates into English, but I'll look it up. This also produces pods that are edible by both human and animal. Those that fall on the ground, I often feed to the rabbits or the goats. And because it overhangs the road, just as the mesquite tree does, these are trees that Mexicans come with their far-reaching pod pullers or whatever they're called, and they pull down all these pods and put them in big buckets and take them home. But this too is a nitrogen fixer. Because that large guamuchil is such a wonderful shade tree, I bought another at about 5 feet high, and it's now probably about 10 feet high because they do grow quite fast. And this has only been 3 months ago at the most. But this guamuchil is also a nitrogen fixer, as was the other one and the whole species. And once I get this yard trimmed again, I can't believe I just mowed it like 4 or 5 days ago, but with this rain, all of the things that are planted near it will benefit from it. And you can see I have a stand of bananas right there within 5 feet of it. And this tree, you see all the beautiful green new branches starting. The older branches died and I will trim those off, but it is just doing beautifully, catching on with all these new branches. This is a Royal Poinciana, and it will have a huge spread, probably at least 20 feet wide and 20 to 30 or 40 feet tall. I think we'll try to keep it lower. But this is also a nitrogen fixer. So everything that will go around it, and eventually it will be a big cactus garden in here, in this corner, will benefit from the nitrogen in the soil that is produced by this tree. The lush greenness of all of the foliage growing underneath this tree here, which is one of the guamuchils, just amazes me because it gets rain, but these are mostly shade plants, and they're only thriving so much because of the nitrogen that this tree puts into the soil. I've never fertilized these. Nothing. Okay, back inside now. I mentioned the canopy size of one of the trees out there, and here's the reason why. However wide that canopy spreads, and you saw how wide those trees are, when the leaves and the pods and the dead branches fall from those trees into the ground and then decompose, all of that decomposition adds to the nitrogen in the ground below them. So you see it can be effective in quite a large area. Now I'm going to show you a list of some of the nitrogen fixing plants and trees that I was able to discover in searching on Google. Let me know in comments if you found any of these around your house. Lots more garden information to come as I work in my garden and my yard and amongst my trees. And I'm realizing some successes with things that I'm growing, and sadly some failures too. I will be sharing all of it. So come on back, please subscribe and visit often. Thank you.